It's been a mighty long time since I've cleaned house in this particular manner. But this is basically one of those videos where like I respond, to an atheist YouTuber and people get mad at me because then they learn that I, believe in God and they unsubscribe. So, let's go ahead and get that out the way. Go ahead and unsubscribe. See you later. You have a good life. Okay, so now those people are gone, let's actually start and talk about the video on Rationally Rules Made, because I actually find it very interesting because this is actually one of the most poorly argued videos I've seen in a while, and yet lots of people really like it. And I think they like it more so because they already agreed with him before, so they didn't really need to actually think critically about what he was saying. So today I'm going to go over his video about how he debunked the fact that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values. Just going to let him kind of go through his introduction and then, take this typical response video format style. He will take us away.
One of the most prominent and pernicious claims that theists, and indeed some atheists, are currently making is that Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values. And yet, this claim is absolute nonsense. And what's worse, it's often not even an argument. It's just an assertion, a statement that straight out ignores history and science. This is Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian values, debunked. Now, it tends to be quite easy to take on this claim, because, as just said, that's often all it is, a claim, and so refuting it tends to merely require a swift motion from Hitchens' razor. That which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. But in the few cases in which an argument is actually given, it tends to be in reference to morality, which in effect is the assertion that Western morality is based on the assumption that the Abrahamic God exists.
Well, that's not said correctly. What's more accurate is to say that Western morality is based on Christian values. And that's totally different from the assumption that a Christian God exists, because the idea that our morality is functionally a part of the teachings of Jesus Christ exists independent of whether or not there is or isn't a God. And what I mean by that is, you don't really need to think that there is a God in order to live in a Christian-like manner. Now, in order to be a Christian, by definition of the word, you would ipso facto have to. But in order to read the Bible and apply what Jesus Christ said, and in the many different teachings he had, you don't need to think that there is a God. You don't need to think that Jesus Christ was divine in order to act it out. So the basic principle is saying that the basic functioning foundation of how we interact with each other and how we treat each other, or how our laws work, or how our morality works, especially if you live in America of all places, is based mostly in a Christian-like idea, or what we think is good is mostly based in Christianity. It is actually entirely accurate. It's not accurate to say that we work on the assumption that there is a God, because that's kind of different, and I can talk about that in some other videos somewhere else. But functionally, yes, it would require that the teachings come from Christianity, or Jesus Christ in particular.
Most people in this room act out a Judeo-Christian ethic.
And he's not wrong.
Judeo-Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
Our foundational principles, certainly in Western culture, come from Christianity.
I'm arguing that the ethic that drives our culture is predicated on the idea of God.
Now, the first thing to be said about most of those who make this assertion is that they are utterly ignoring history before Judaism, and in doing so, they're just expecting us to assume that before its inception, people somehow didn't know that it's wrong to kill, exploit, and steal.
Well, you see, my friend, you say that people who assert this are ignoring history, but what you're actually doing is arguing against something that they're not claiming. You see the point? They're not arguing that morality started with Christianity. They're not saying that morality started with Judaism. What they're saying is that the nations that we live, Western nations, in particular America, and I can speak more from an American perspective because, newsflash, I am American, are based and predicated on Judeo-Christian type values. It doesn't mean that they're the first type of morality that ever existed ever. No. But what it means is that when it comes specifically to what they're talking about, America, since you've mostly only shown Americans or Canadians actually in your video saying that, it really doesn't matter if there was anything that happened prior to Judaism and prior to Christianity.
Now, the first thing to be said about most of those who make this assertion is that they are utterly ignoring history before Judaism, and in doing so, they're just expecting us to assume that before its inception, people somehow didn't know that it's wrong to kill, exploit, and steal. That before the Ten Commandments, life was nasty, brutish, and short.
Yeah, but see, the interesting thing here is that's true. In fact, life was like that after the Ten Commandments. So the introduction of morality or laws and guidelines didn't make the world a better place immediately. It took a long time in order to make the world, at least relatively safe. And even then, it didn't really stop people from killing other people. It just vastly reduced the amount of times that it happens. But life was brutish, and people did steal from each other, and people did kill each other, and people did rape. That's why they had to create a moral law and guides and punishments for it, because people did do that, and people did it after these laws were established. They did. I mean, shit, people are still doing it now, actually.
But this simply isn't true. Evidence shows that official laws against murder and theft date back at least 4,400 years to Lagash, Mesopotamia, which of course is 600 years before the birth of Judaism, and that official laws abolishing slavery only date back 200 years, which of course is 3,600 years after Judaism.
Now, it might be because I have a small Negro brain and an IQ under 85. But I truly do not understand the point of which you bringing up slavery here. No, seriously, I don't really understand why you brought up slavery here. It seems largely irrelevant. And it also doesn't even seem like a good comparison to the fact that you brought up murder and theft first. I don't really see its relevance. But that being said, showing me the fact that laws like this existed prior to Christianity is not a counter-argument to Western civilization's morality is based on Christianity. In fact, this example doesn't even address that fact. Unless you can find some connection between America and the laws of Mesopotamia, it really doesn't matter if you can find a lot of similar laws prior to then. In fact, as a Christian or as someone that believes in God, you would believe that God, who created the universe, exists long before the idea of Christianity as a religion or organized religion even appeared or came to be a thing, because, well, God created the universe. So it really doesn't matter whether or not the point in time in which Christianity was established as a religion, because God has always existed. And with God always existing, good and evil, at least the intrinsic knowledge of good and evil has always existed in human beings, because Adam and Eve ate from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So as a Christian, you would already have the understanding that morality, or as a thing, has expanded between the baser understanding or spirit or core of human beings, because God has always been a factor. God, the knowledge of good and evil, has always been a factor intrinsic to humans since the inception of humanity. The point of bringing this up is to say that it really doesn't matter if you can establish that there are similar laws between Christianity or similar values between Christianity and other religions, because as a Christian, you would already understand, or if you argue with a Christian, they would already understand that humans intrinsically already have the knowledge of good and evil inside of them. However, the interesting thing that you're going to have to do here to prove that Western civilization is not based on moral Christian moral guidelines is to link, one, that the framework of our values are not predicated on Christianity, and two, you'd have to link it to something else, which you haven't done here. In fact, I could very easily link why people think that our civilization is based on Christian guidelines, and that's because most of the people that have existed in America, if you want to ignore the Native Americans, but most of the people who exist, at least now, and have existed 50, 200 years ago, have been Christians. In fact, the first settlers that came here were pilgrims who wanted to practice religious freedom. So just the very first people who came here to start establishing the colonies of America were Christian. And the people that came after that were also, well, Christians. And the vast majority of those people were still Christians. That's the link. I mean, it's not a profound link, and it's not a particularly interesting one, but that's why it exists. So unless you can try to explain to me how, as a group of Christians, their morality is not somehow based in Christianity, I think that kind of ends the argument there, but we're going to keep going. Continue.
But since these facts don't fit the Judeo-Christian narrative, let's just ignore them, right?
Well, Yeah. And it's not really because they don't fit the Judeo-Christian narrative. It's just mostly because they're kind of irrelevant and don't really address any argument or any core principle. I mean, all you've done is to say that laws against murder and theft existed before Christianity. It doesn't mean that our foundational principles are rooted in the laws from Mesopotamia. Our moral guidelines are still based on the Christian settlers that came here and settled America.
I mean, it's not like Abrahamic religion hasn't ignored and still ignores facts that contradict it, is it?
Well, you're being glib here, but I don't really know what you're trying to say here. You're just jabbing, so I just can only shrug my shoulders.
Those values were first embedded clearly and concisely in the Ten Commandments.
Or to put this all another way, most of those who make this assertion just expect us to believe that an evolved social species somehow didn't evolve social norms.
Oh, no. They expect you to believe that since it was Christian settlers who came and established America as it is, and even some of those settlers then went on to force the Native Americans into their populations to convert to Christianity, that it would logically necessitate that most of their moral framework came from Christianity. And whether they applied to Christianity as well or as perfect as they should have, which some of them kind of didn't, if you just, crack open a history book, the point is, that's where the foundation of their morality came from, Christianity, because they were Christians.
That despite all of the evidence telling us otherwise, such as the fact that wolves, elephants, chimpanzees, rats, bats and whales have all been proven to exhibit moral behaviour, humans for some reason required divine intervention.
Well, no, not really. I mean, completely removing God as a thing. Let's say I'm going to be an atheist for a second here, okay, and say there is no God, right? This argument doesn't address anything because you're still stuck on arguing about whether or not Christianity is the beginning of morality rather than Western civilization's morality is based on Christianity. It really doesn't matter if there was some other form of morality that existed prior to Christianity or alongside Christianity or with Christianity. What matters is whether or not the culture that currently exists in the West is predicated on those values and on those beliefs. And they are, because the vast majority of those people were Christians. So, saying that an evolved social species is able to come up or evolve different ways in order to act morally or come up with morality from whatever structure they came out from, it really doesn't matter what it is, never addresses what you're trying to debunk. And that is whether or not our nation, or our Western nations, is particularly America, is based upon, or our nation's morality at least, or values at least, are based upon that of Christianity.
I think it's worth me doubling down here, because for whatever reason many seem to have a hard time understanding how human morality could have emerged naturally, when it's really quite simple. We are sentient beings that have evolved the capacity to feel pain and the desire to avoid it, and our recognition that the best way to achieve this is by cooperating and establishing rules is morality. It's that simple. Morality isn't this mysterious, unfathomable thing. The religious just need it to be. Because, to paraphrase the founding father and second US President John Adams, mystery is a convenient excuse for absurdity. Anyhow, with the question of where do moral values come from answered, I'm convinced that the best way to succinctly address the primary assertion is to first identify Western values, and to then trace back when, where, and why they emerged. And so, let's start with freedom of speech, the very bedrock of a free society, and the right that allows us to enact and defend all other rights.
Now, there's a really big problem here that I don't think a lot of people took into consideration, and that is the fact that freedom of speech is not a moral guideline. Freedom of speech is a right given to us so that the government cannot mishandle and mistreat us. Freedom of speech doesn't really have anything to do about how you should treat people. It's more about one of the basic necessities that liberty grants us as a free society. And so in other words, I guess it's better to say that freedom of speech is more of a product of liberty, more so than a value of liberty. More so we have the ability to say what we want to say because we're free and we have liberty, and the government can't infringe upon that because it's inalienable. And our ability to choose and think for ourselves is given to us, well, by some people would say by the Creator, and if not by the Creator, by natural laws, whatever the fuck that is. The basic point is, freedom of speech isn't a moral guideline. It's a governmental protection. And those are not the same thing. Like a moral guideline would be how we treat each other, an ethic would be how we should treat each other. Basic moral functionings that I'm pretty sure everyone can root back with. It's actually something he said earlier in his video that I actually kind of gave him shit for, but I mean, it's actually kind of a funny thing. And that is the idea of empathy, treating people that you want to be treated. Now, you could find this in a lot of different religions, but one of the most famous ones, at least in America, would that be of Christianity. Do unto others as you have others do unto you. The golden rule. Yeah, you can find it in lots of different places, but since most of the people were Christians, a lot of it heard it from, well, Christianity. Unless you can trace it back that Jesus Christ got it from somewhere else, we're just going to keep it there. The point is, morality is based on how we treat each other, not how the government really treats us or what the government can and can't take away from us. So basically, this example in and of itself doesn't really address the basic principle foundation of how we act morally. In fact, let's talk about hypocrisy. A lot of people are really not fans of hypocrisy, right? Why? Well, again, Jesus Christ said, judge not that ye shall not be judged, for whatever measure you judge, it shall be measured upon you. Again, Jesus Christ is saying that you should not be a hypocrite. You shouldn't go out and judge people based on different things that they're doing when you're doing something wrong too. Now, this is something that a lot of people agree with, something that is Christian, and it's not really something I've noticed in lots of other different religions. A Christian ideal there spoken from Jesus Christ himself. You see where I'm getting at? When you actually break down how we treat each other and how we like to treat each other, how we want to treat each other, a lot of it comes down to stuff you can find in Christianity. And I'll probably sprinkle some more examples as the video goes on, but he's going to keep going.
Is this Western value of Judeo-Christian origin? No. Both the Old and New Testament proclaim strict limitations on free speech through primarily blasphemy laws, and until very recently Jewish and Christian governments declared exactly the same. Hell, the Inquisition is the antithesis of free speech, as they literally incinerated anyone who didn't share their barbaric, unenlightened beliefs. So far as evidence indicates, the principle of free speech and expression dates back 2,500 years to ancient Athens and the Roman Republic. But true freedom of speech didn't emerge until the early Enlightenment, 1689, with first the British Bill of Rights and shortly after the French Revolution, 3,500 years after Judaism and 1,700 years after Christianity.
You see, freedom of speech isn't really a moral guideline. It's not really telling you how you should act. It's telling you that you can act in a particular manner, and that the government doesn't have a right or should not have the ability to infringe upon that. But the interesting thing about freedom of speech is, despite the fact that we have this ability, we all know that there are still some things that you shouldn't do with it. For example, the most cliche of all examples is you don't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Now, you can do that, but the question is, should you? And why shouldn't you? Because you can cause a lot of damage and a lot of mass hysteria, paranoia, and you can even get some people hurt if, say, someone trips and falls and they get trampled on, or they get pushed out of the way or knocked out or whatever. So the morality and your ability to use freedom of speech is how you should use it. Whether it's a good idea to yell, fire, in a crowded movie theater. That's not really a good example to use to state as a value of Western civilization, because the true value is actually liberty, not the ability to speak freely. And why do we value liberty? Because even written in the Declaration of Independence itself, actually, is because the people who wrote it believe that man is given certain inalienable rights by their creator. Now, this is literally in the Declaration of Independence, and since most of the people who settled America were Christian, it's very easy to tell where they got the idea of a creator from and where they got the values from. They got the values of liberty from Christianity, having the ability of free will or having the right of free will given to us by God. That's where it really comes from, and that's why we have this ability. So, continue.
Moving on, what about liberty? The abolition of slavery, and with it the pursuit of happiness. Did this value that so characterizes the West come from Judaism or Christianity? Again, no. The Old and New Testament both explicitly endorse slavery, and in fact provide rules and regulations for several categories of slaves, regulations that both Jews and Christians enacted and upheld during the vast majority of their time in power.
Which would be totally different from the way we think of slavery, again, coming from like America or more modern. Well, actually, slavery actually still exists in the modern world, believe it or not. So yeah, one of the most interesting things that I find oftentimes about the whole like slavery debate in America is a lot of people, especially the atheist branch or anti-theist branch, more accurate, would say that the Bible was used in order to condone and support slavery, and this is a true statement. But the other half of that statement was it was also the same Bible that was used to form arguments against slavery and why man should be free and why we should value liberty and allowing men to be able to choose for their own lives. Again, the same Bible. So it's easy to say that, like it really is, because you could find like scriptures of slavery in there, but it's also really easy to say that, you know, the Lord also would allow us to have our free will and ability to choose and do what we wish to do. So I find it kind of as a useless thing to use when you're arguing for it against slavery, considering the fact that you can find arguments again within the same text. But I mean, people, they don't really think that far ahead about the topic. They just kind of like hear the buzzword slavery and immediately think evil, and it is evil, but you got to think a little bit more than that. You got to be a little more complex with it if you really want to have a genuine conversation about like morality and the Bible and all of that.
The truth of the matter is that the principle of liberty dates back, again, 2,500 years to Athens, when the lawgiver Solon abolished debt slavery and freed all Athenian citizens who had formerly been enslaved.
A lot of good that shit did in Athens. The only problem is America is in Athens. And Great Britain wasn't Athens either. And Rome wasn't Athens. In other words, the idea of one city-state abolishing slavery doesn't mean that there's a spillover effect that branches out to all of the entire world. Athens was one city-state, and slavery still existed for hundreds of years afterwards when you brought the idea up. And again, unless you can link back the idea of liberty in America to that of Athens, it's kind of a useless argument to bring forward and kind of a useless point to use here to say that the idea of liberty came from Athens when, again, Athens is just one place and slavery still existed for hundreds of years afterwards. So,
but true abolition of slavery didn't occur until the 19th century, 3,600 years after Judaism and 1,800 years after Christianity. Now some, such as Theo Hobson, would argue that since Christianity dominated the West during this time, the abolition of slavery was, and still is, rooted in Judeo-Christian values. But this is as fallacious as asserting that since animal rights first emerged in Hindu culture, therefore animal rights was, and still is, rooted in Hindu values. It's a type of false cause fallacy.
but wait a minute. And I'm going to need everyone that watched this video to think critically about what he just said. In fact, I want you to think so critically about it, I'm going to play it back, and I want you guys to listen to it a second time.
Now some, such as Theo Hobson, would argue that since Christianity dominated the West during this time, the abolition of slavery was, and still is, rooted in Judeo-Christian values. But this is as fallacious as asserting that since animal rights first emerged in Hindu culture, therefore animal rights was, and still is, rooted in Hindu values. It's a type of false cause fallacy.
Well then, if that's true, wouldn't you just be setting up a counter-argument against the last 2 points you brought up prior to? I mean, think about it critically for a second. Remember, it was you who said this.
The truth of the matter is that the principle of liberty dates back, again, 2,500 years to Athens, when the lawgiver Solon abolished debt slavery and freed all Athenian citizens who had formerly been enslaved. But true abolition of slavery didn't occur until the 19th century, 3,600 years after Judaism. So far as evidence indicates, the principle of free speech and expression dates back 2,500 years to ancient Athens and the Roman Republic. But true freedom of speech didn't emerge until the early Enlightenment, 1689, with first the British Bill of Rights and shortly after the French Revolution, 3,500 years after Judaism and 1,700 years after Christianity.
Here's the thing. It's totally possible for people of two different areas to come up with something very similar. Look at the code of chivalry and Bushido. While they're not exactly the same, there are a lot of similarities between the two codes that these ancient warriors use, despite the fact that they're separated by not only an ocean, but also an entire other continent for that matter. The point is, unless again you can link back to how Christianity or how any of these ancient world texts kind of related to how the people of the founding fathers or like how the people in America acted, then there really isn't much point in bringing it up. Because I can link back to how the Christians came up with these ideas using the biblical text and using Christianity. And considering the fact that that was their frame of reference, and also considering the fact that a lot of these people were, I wouldn't go as far to say completely uneducated, but were definitely limited in their ability of prime reading resources, which is that of ancient texts, like we have now that we have the internet. A lot of their ideas still stemmed from the Christianity that they were exposed to. That's where they got it from. And there's really no way around that. So the whole point of you bringing up these different ideas or these different facts came from different ancient civilizations. Again, you've never linked back that that's where the Western world even got the idea from. But also, even if you can link back that that idea came from there, it doesn't even discount the fact that the people who originally came up with the idea, who were not exposed to the ancient world texts, got it from the Christianity which they were exposed to. So the point is, I feel like you actually kind of argued against yourself here, but whatever. Continue.
Okay, well, what about democracy? The ability to elect and, more importantly, remove our leaders. Surely the West inherited this model from Judeo-Christian values, right?
Yeah, once again, democracy is a system of government. It's not really a way of which we decide morality or the way that we should act towards each other. Again, that's based. I'm repeating myself here, but it's based in Christian values, man. It's based on the word of Jesus Christ.
Again, no. Absolutely not. Both the Old and New Testament explicitly endorse theocracy, which is a system of government in which one or more people rule in the name of a god or gods.
It's not immoral. It's a system of government. In fact, the whole argument here doesn't work in principle, because you're talking about a way of which to govern people, not in a way of which people should act and treat each other.
For example, in medieval Europe, in which Judeo-Christian values absolutely dominated, the monarch could do whatever they wanted to whoever they wanted without justification, because he had the divine right of kings.
That was until the Magna Carta. I mean, the European people of that day did realize that that was a bit of a problem, and that's, I think, I could be wrong here, part of the reason why Parliament exists, like in general. I do think that the reason why that set of government was kind of crafted, or at the very least I know the Magna Carta was specifically written, was because people realized that the king has an absolute amount of power over us, and there needs to be some kind of, breakers to it to make sure that he doesn't just, mistreat us.
The principle of democracy can be traced back, again, 2,500 years to Athens, when Cleisthenes reformed their constitution so that randomly selected citizens could assume administrative and judicial offices.
And that might be true and all, but another thing that's also important to recognize is that we don't really live in a true democracy. We live in a democratic republic. And I could go into detail of explaining the differences, but I feel like you could really just go on YouTube and do that yourself and get a much better explanation. So I would encourage you to do that. Again, so the idea isn't really so much that we value democracy as much as we value representation and people representing the way we feel and voting based on what we want. It's a little bit more complex than that, by the way, but whatever, continue.
However, it wasn't perfect, as citizenship excluded women, slaves, foreigners, non-landowners, and men under the age of 20. Unfortunately, as just mentioned, the principle was buried during medieval Europe, but it saw a significant resurgence in the 18th century due to Enlightenment values, and true democracy, as in all citizens who are mentally capable above the age of 18 being able to vote, was finally established in the 20th century, 3,700 years after Judaism, and 1,900 years after Christianity.
And that's all cool and everything, and I'm glad you like democracy and all that. It's just that democracy is not a form of morality, and thus is totally irrelevant to this conversation. This is not a point for or against you. This is, I can't even call it a tangent. It's just totally unrelated. It's just not even, you're just digressing. Or you're morally grandstanding, I think is probably the much better word to use there.
And while we're on the topic of suffrage, what about equality in general? Equal opportunity for all ethnicities, all sexes, all classes, all ages, and all sexual preferences. Was this beacon of freedom and equality a gift from Judaism or Christianity?
Yeah, the real funny thing about all of this is that probably one of the main reasons why equality as a concept exists, at least the way it does in America, as in all men being equal under the law and all men having equal rights, is actually something that stems from Christianity, believing that we are all God's children, all God's people, and that we are all equal under His rule and His law. It's directly where it comes from. I mean, again, if you read the first opening lines of the Declaration of Independence, we are given certain inalienable rights by our Creator, that being, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The reason why this started to extend and start attaching itself into other races or groups and people beyond that of just, the white settlers or just, the white people there, was mostly, again, because they started to realize and think critically about what they had established, and they kind of had to extend that to all different peoples of different races and whatnot, because of the way liberty worked, which came from their idea of God and be equal under God. That's exactly where it came from, and why it was a problem for such a long time. And that's why they used the Bible as a way to help explain why slavery isn't a good thing, despite the fact other people tried to explain why they thought that they should keep slavery. And the interesting thing about trying to keep slavery was not even so much because they morally thought it was a good thing, but mostly in order to try to keep their economy intact. And also, like the Civil War is actually a little bit more complex than just, fighting over slavery. But again, it's more better you research that yourself than to come to this video about it, because that is a whole other tangent. The important thing is, again, specifically, the idea of equality and being equal under the law is something that stems from being equal under God Himself. That's where the idea stems and comes from. Again, in the Declaration of Independence, and the fact that vast majority of people are Christians, and they started thinking critically about that whole, God and free will thing.
Again, no. Judeo-Christian edicts fervently oppose such equality, demanding the subordination of women.
I mean, I guess in the context of a family, yes, the wife being the subordinate, like the first mate to the husband who is the ship captain, I guess in its necessity would require her to be in a lower, system or a lower stature. But I think that's kind of more just the pure logistics of how decision making works. It's literally impossible to have a 50-50 decision, because in its nature they're both equal. So it's just random chance on which decision to go to. So men being leaders, due to the fact that they have more responsibility and more functionality and more ability to just kind of impact the world, is not even so much a commentary on how the way the world should be, but is literally a commentary on the way the world is. That the world is built that way. Women do select men who are going to be leaders and make more money than them and who are bigger and stronger than them. That's just what women do and have done. I don't really know. I don't know. I don't really think that's a quote in to say that women are lesser than men or subservient to them, but it seems more of a quote, and that's just kind of what women do. They pick men to lead them, and they do.
The execution of homosexuals, and, as already mentioned, the endorsement of slavery and the execution of blasphemers. And so, again, it's no surprise that medieval Europe embodied precisely just that. Now, I could go on by tracing back the foundation of all Western values and practices, such as Easter and Christmas, which are both pagan festivals that have been appropriated by Christianity, but I think I've more than made my point.
Actually, not really. You have really bad arguments that most of the time don't even actually address the scope of what you're trying to critically analyze. And when I say most of the time, I actually kind of mean 100% of the time. You set up the video to explain how Western civilization's morality code does not stem from Christianity, and yet what you lead with is talking about how morality became a thing in general, or how Christian morality wasn't the first morality to ever be. And while you may not be wrong there, it really doesn't have anything to do with how Westerners operate. Then what you go on to do is explain different types of governmental values and the way we believe we should be governed by the government, as if, again, that's a system of morality. And it really isn't. Those are all consequences of liberty that you brought up. They weren't really moral guidelines that explain why we should do this and why we should treat each other in this particular manner. You are right about the whole Easter thing and a lot of different religions kind of being mixed in with Christianity and whatnot. And, that's a whole topic unto itself that can be addressed, and I'm not going to. But the point is, most of your arguments don't address or attack the core of what you should have been attacking. And I feel like the only reason a lot of people agree with the video you made here today was mostly because they just already agree with you, not because you made very good points, because you really didn't. And I guess I'm gonna end the video here. There's not left to say, and I think there's a lot more that can be discussed in the comment section. If you feel inclined to ask me and talk to me about different things I didn't bring in. I mostly didn't bring it in because again this video is long as hell as it is. But again, in the comment section below, I can probably talk to you a little bit more about different ideas and whatnot if I find them reasonable to chat about. For everyone that's leaving because you've just found out that I believe in God, I hope you guys have a really good life. I will see you guys later. It was nice to have you on my channel. Thank you and see you later. See you later, Space Cowboys. I hope you have a good rest of your life. I hope my videos have helped you out up to this point. And for everyone else, man, I actually hope you guys enjoyed today's video. And if you did, man, go ahead and hit the like button. And shoot, go ahead and click that comment in the comment box below, and as always, you guys have yourselves a great day, and I'll see you cool cats soon. Adios.